All right, so some of you guys were asking what I'm doing with the spiderweb discussions and how they operate. So this is a quick explanation and then a demo of the students doing it. So my part is brief. This is where I got the idea. Alexis Wiggins, teacher, and she's been all over the place. Anyway, spiderweb discussion, it's not new. It comes from the Harkness Learning. She just puts it into this kind of neat book, which gave me some practical ways to apply it. And of course, you fit it to your own class, so you always bastardize things to fit your needs. So I would recommend it. It gave me some practical application, like I said, and I have it. You can come borrow it from me. All right, so here's where the things start. Sorry, this is where it starts. I had this queued up, so the second tab. So my AP kids have already read about the Industrial Revolution in one chapter, and then like 2 chapters later, they read about the Industrial Revolution taking place, or kind of taking place in other places, and about the changes that it took place based on the Industrial Revolution in other places, and why it didn't carry out in their textbook. So they read concrete information. Then they read this one by Stearns, who's a bigwig in world history, and his title is Industrial Revolution Outside the West. And he's kind of trying to explain, why it did it or didn't take off in certain places. And so it's not super complicated text, but it's a bit challenging. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So 6 pages of text. With margins so they can annotate and read. The in-class kids, they get a hard copy so they can annotate and read. The distance learners, well, they can print it up, or I put some at the front desk, but I was told I didn't have any takers on this one, so up to them. And then here's the essence of the question. Did 19th century efforts to ignite industrial revolution outside the West fail because these societies neglected to develop capitalism, or did they fail because their local needs were subordinate to the Western capitalists? So that's a good involved question, and it heavily influenced the aspects of AP World History, or any history class. You want to know not just what happened, but why. Explain. So I took that question and turned it into an activity for them, and that's this one. And we used a similar format for their previous lesson, the 2 previous lessons that we did on this. The 3 previous spiderweb lessons that we did. So they have to do some sort of reading that coincides with what they're covered in their textbook prior to coming to class. That's their prep to come in to have a valid discussion. So with that, usually I've kept this. What is the author's arguments? Author's arguments thesis. What is the purpose of this document? And then I modify the questions to represent what was in the discussion, and also include some stuff that's based on their books, or based on what they read in their textbook, excuse me. All right, so what was one of the consequences that stalled industrialization? What was the consequence of the stalled industrialization? That's a big aspect. And then this one, what non-Western, so number 4 right here that I'm highlighting right now, this was not anywhere in the article, but I'm trying to force them or to create a situation where they're thinking about the context, not just of the article, but of the stuff that they read going into the article, so that they're using their history knowledge. Number 5 is just a question that came from the text, because I definitely want to answer that one, because that's the essence. Once again, setting this up based on the article, this is a chart that we would have done similar based on just the context of the textbook that we're using. But in this case, it lends itself to the article itself talks about Russia, then India, then Egypt, then the Ottoman Empire, and how they tried to industrialize, and then the results of them, and then what they're going to find out they weren't successful, and they're doing a comparison of the 4, and then to what degree. All right, and then the 5th part, the last part that they did, not 5th part, but the last part that they do is they tie it to what's called the CED, Course Exam Descriptions, and those are the guidelines for the AP World Content Curriculum, and I have them right here. That it? So this is just taken from the CED, and so I'm just going to get to 1 or 2 of them. That's Enlightenment, and there's Industrial Revolution. So these things right here. Do I have this? No, it's not highlighting. Okay, so this one where my mouse is, this is the learning objectives. So those are what we call LOs. That's the focus of what they're supposed to be picking up and being able to do and discuss. Okay, and those become essay questions later on the AP test. Okay, so explain how environmental factors contributed to industrial revolution. That one didn't show up so much in that one. Okay, oh, this one is explain how different modes and locations of production have developed and changed over time. That would be a good one. And they have to select 3 of these and then kind of give some sort of answer based off the document, off their content knowledge. Explain how technology, that one's a big one in there. And this one is a big one. Explain the causes and effects of economic strategies of different states and empires. Okay, so that would be a big one. All right, and so back to our worksheet. They come in, they have these, and then so the focus is they have the guiding questions from the article. And from the activity and the LOs to discuss in class in a kind of intelligent manner. And I think that's it. Yeah. All right. My part is done. So let's see how this plays out. Oh wait, no, I have to show you the end result. So that's not what I want. This is what I want. So this is what it looks like. So they're going to sit around in a semicircle, close to a circle as I could get. And each time they make a comment, then I draw a line from one comment to the other comment. And all this chicken scratch around the edge are me taking notes on content for the most part, and occasionally on some things that I want to make sure to emphasize. And what's happened, which I really like, is for the most part, they bring up all the connections. I don't have to go over tons of stuff, and so I picked this group because it's one of the stronger groups, and there's participation from most of them. This time we had a little bit less right here on this kid, who's mostly involved. Okay, but you can see some kids participate quite a bit, and that's just your contributing. And then there's all these little notes that I'm making to discuss, and down here at this part is I'm making some notes that I want to cover, okay, to make sure and talk about in the debrief. Okay, and then so Japan westernized, but why? Okay, and then since it's right after their presentation, so I make sure that I give myself about 10 to 15 minutes to discuss what they did and the things that they kind of either missed or forgot or didn't include or make connections. Okay. In the debrief. Then we go over the rubric together as in class right then and there, so that's kind of nice. Okay, and so this group, like I said, they do pretty stellar. This one is a fault in the sense of balance and order prevails, focuses on one speaker, the time discussed lively, the pace is right. So in this case, they were dinged kind of because they were hopping around they went from one idea to another idea, and then I told them straight out. I said it sounded like you guys were just in it to make sure that you got your checked off, but you weren't listening to what the person was saying. So, Billy said, I wear tennis shoes, and Sandy said, the sun is in the sky. And I said, no, we need to have a cohesive discussion. So when Billy brings up his tennis shoes, then there should be a discussion about tennis shoes. Okay? That's not what they were talking about. That's a quick example. Okay, and so that's what a discussion is. It's not just contributing your statement, but you need to listen. And so I told him that's a skill that we need to work on. Okay, and it's part of the thing that's driving it, because I really think it's pushing some of the kids to come in prepared, and also pushing some of the kids who talk a lot to try to involve the other students. So this group, like I said, did really well. For our class in AP World, items 7, 8, and 9 are the heart of what we're going for. So they got to make deep meanings and connections, and they definitely have to use specific evidence. That's what we're about. I mean, if you don't have the evidence, we're trying to avoid the kid that just talks about the generalities. And so that's a death sentence right there. All right, so students reference AP historical skills such as analysis, cause and effect, continuity, and those are what we call our historical reasoning skills that make up the skills that they need to do in the AP essays. All right, so that's about it. Oh, the Zoom feature. I do it on Zoom as well. We do a Zoom group. It doesn't carry out as well. I mean, it works and it's sufficient. There's 15 kids in there in the classes, so that makes it complicated, and then the tech makes it complicated. But for the most part, the kids are, this one for Zoom discussion, appropriate behavior, they're good. They're really good, and we have had mom walk in and everything, but it wasn't a distraction type of thing. So, but much better in class. I think that's it. All right, yeah, I'm done on my end. Next part you'll see is the students coming in and setting up the discussion, and then a sample of one of the discussions that featured this score. Okay. Oh, I forgot to tell you. In the book, she says multiple times that it shouldn't be graded or that she doesn't grade them. But I think I read, or at least I read into it, that I can grade it. Okay. So in my class, it's 20% of their grade, and I plan to have 7 to 8 of these. And then I told them that the lowest score will be dropped, or your 0 will be dropped, because we've already had a couple of kids miss their session. So I think that's fair, and I think that I really seen them make connections, and that's what I'm super excited about. All right.
Hey, yeah.
You did? You guys got your hair done and everything? All right, this is the period 3 class, the A group. All right, there we go. All right. Okay, you guys come on in. Oh, that's fantastic. And they're going to demonstrate what goes on. So when they come into class, there's instructions on the board. So I'll hold that for there. And then they're already working on that. They got their documents out. Let's take about 3 more minutes to get those items up there on the board. Okay, so right now they're putting the LOs.
Oh, I need to put my LO.
And then they try not to overlap on LOs and just try to make sure they get all the ones they could. This one had a lot of them, didn't it?
Yeah.
Like everything in Unit 5, right?
That was B.
Okay, and so right there is some of the work they did, and it shows up here. Someone has a document, so here's a document that they have. It's tagged up, and then their responses, so they're coming in ready and prepared to talk. And see, there's the LOs. It looks like they have the other piece of paper over there. And the LOs come from the unit study guides. Where's my unit study guide? Yep. The unit study guide right there. All right, so what's our discussion today?
Industrial Revolution outside the West.
Outside. And what chapter did you guys read?
32.
Okay. So the IR out of West. 32. And the floor is yours, guys.
So let's just start off by discussing the thesis.
So I said the author's thesis was that attempts at industrialization in countries outside the West failed to stimulate real industrial revolutions. However, Western demands on foreign economies brought change without industrialization.
I also said that the author argued that countries became dependent on Western markets for manufactured goods, because we see that in paragraph 1.
And I think that demand, because they were importing manufactured goods, they didn't really, that's like one of the reasons they didn't industrialize as much. And they remained agrarian societies, and they were providing the industrialized places with raw materials so that they could import industrialized materials.
Yeah, I had like the same argument as for your thesis, which is like Vermont, and then I also put that another argument was that the West Industrial Revolution led to pilot projects and Western demands in the world economies. And I looked up pilot projects, and they're like small implements used to prove the viability of an idea before commitment.
Yeah, I was kind of confused on that.
Yeah, me too. I didn't know that.
A lot of these pilot projects were in hopes of industrialization, such as in Russia, mentioned in the article, but a lot of these efforts didn't go anywhere for many reasons.
So why do you guys think the U.S. industrialized?
Well, I think they realized that they wouldn't be able to survive just based on agricultural needs, so they industrialized, they had mass production of materials and goods that they were able to export for profit increase.
Also, in paragraph 2 of the article, it mentions that the U.S. was able to industrialize because of their extensive commercial experience and their cultural ties with Britain. So I feel like anyone that had ties to Britain kind of had an advantage to industrialization.
I think it was also really important that Europe had colonies in the U.S. So they were able to,
They had direct contact with Britain, so they basically had settlements there, and wherever Britain imperialized, which is what Chapter 32 is all about, they basically industrialized to their own benefit for their empire.
Also in the book, I remember it stating that U.S. wasn't as dependent on other countries like Europe, so they still maintained their economy as capitalism, not depending on others.
I think that the biggest influence on the U.S. was the connection with Britain, because they were like the fastest and biggest area to industrialize first.
I also want to connect because Britain was able to help the states that were outside of the West, and the states outside of the West were also to assist the creation for Britain's industrialization.
they were helping each other.
An example of that would be I think it was cotton that was produced in India and sent to Britain.
Yeah.
I wanted to add on to what you said. So the U.S. having ties with Britain is what kind of separated them from other societies, and that's what and also them being more independent. Other societies were more dependent on foreign economies, and the U.S. being more dependent is what separated them from the other places mentioned in the article.
I think that was the main lack for other states that were outside of West, because if British was independent and the states were dependent on Britain, they were dependent on Britain, then it would have been harder for them to actually be independent and start industrialization.
So America being more independent allowed them to grow internally more?
And an example where we see that failure to industrialize was in the Middle East, where they didn't fail to industrialize, but they imitated Europeans, and we see that that was part of their struggle and part of their effort to industrialize, where the U.S. was more dependent and they didn't need to imitate anyone to reach industrialization.
Yeah. And going back to what Dan said, how it was internal development in the U.S., you also have to remember that the U.S. made, after getting independence, they made school systems and political developments that other countries tried to imitate. So it was an influence on everyone.
I feel like the U.S. and Europe, also tying back to our book, we've seen constantly that in this time period, they're the greatest influences, and whatever they're doing, other countries are trying to imitate.
For sure. So one example of a society outside the West that tried to industrialize based on European techniques was Russia, and they did have connection with Europe and Britain. They had extensive diplomatic networks. So what do you think was the internal factors that didn't allow the Industrial Revolution to flourish in that society?
Well, Russia lacked skilled artisans, so many of their skilled workers had to be imported, which wasn't a good basis for industrialization. And serfdom kept most Russians bound to their agricultural states, so they couldn't really change their economy without abolishing serfdom.
Yeah, and they were just tied to the traditional agriculture, and they didn't promote manufacturing traditions, and they also had structural barriers.
I want to add onto this topic. On the third page, it also says that they lack new technology, so I think that's also a factor that stopped them from expanding on to industrialization. So
That reminds me of number 5 when it asks if efforts to ignite industrial revolutions outside the West failed because they neglected to develop capitalism or they couldn't. And I said it wasn't so much they wouldn't, but they really couldn't because of their traditional society, which is the agricultural basis and the serfs and landowners, it just couldn't develop into something more.
I agree. I think for so long they became dependent on their agricultural societies that when other places were industrializing first and they were kind of late on it, they had to continue to be agricultural to supply these
Unit 5, D, explain how environmental factors contributed to industrialization. For India, they had main growth in cotton and textile industries as well as crops, which created impact towards British, and that helped them spur into industrialization.
For that same objective, I put something that we mentioned in the beginning of the discussion when we said that Europe had abundant natural resources because there was more arable land in Europe and it wasn't as industrialized, but it did own like colonies that were industrialized. So that was an environmental factor leading to Europe's influence of industrialization.
For Unit 5, LOF, it says explain how technology shaped economic production over time. I said technology like the railroads and steamboats, steamships, led to rapid economic and social change that tied regional markets to global markets.
For Unit 5 LOK, it says, explain the extent to which industrialization brought change. I said industrialization in Europe made places outside the West become increasingly dependent on the world economy. Profit was made from exports that promoted industrialization in the West, and these societies became dependent on manufactured imports rather than producing their own manufactured items. So they remained agricultural.
That ties with the problem of them not taking care of their internal affairs rather than imitating Western way.
All right, last comment?
How do you guys see industrialization impacted today?
I mean, I went through like technology and throughout like all the centuries. Like if industrialization didn't happen, like a lot of things would be different right now. Like we don't have as much advanced technology because like for example, transportation like cars, they all originated from like trains, steam engines, and stuff like that.
And the telegraph.
I think it's important to note that the products we have today came from like places from everywhere. So while Europe industrialized first, over time everywhere kind of began to industrialize, even though we don't see that right now. And the products we have today didn't just come from Europe.
And I think that ties.